This podcast explores graphic and disturbing stories and includes strong language. It therefore may not be suitable for our young listeners or other folks who may find it disturbing.
Untold Cold Cases starts now.
Hello and welcome to Untold Cold Cases podcast, covering different cases that do not get much or any attention. I am your host, Susan Gonzalez. I'm going to discuss the case of Tawnya Knight. She was a 15-year-old teenager murdered in Spring Hills, Kansas, December 7, 1996. It's been 25 years, almost 26 years, since she was murdered, and they're still no closer to solving the case. There are a lot of theories, but in the end, I will give you my own, so let's begin. Tawnya Knight was born February 7, 1981 in Olathe, Kansas. She was the daughter of Frank and Lori Knight. When Tawnya was 3 years old, her mom and dad got a divorce after her dad had an affair with her mom's best friend, Judy, who lived across the street from them. When her parents divorced, Frank Knight ended up marrying Judy and moving to Spring Hills, Kansas, and Lori Knight took the three children to move to Arizona. When Tawnya was 14 years old, she decided she wanted to live with her dad in Kansas. Lori let Tawnya move as she wanted her kids to be happy. Tawnya moved back to Kansas with her dad Frank, her stepmom Judy, and her stepsister Amber, who was about the same age as Tawnya. Tawnya did very well in school that year and was very active in volleyball, basketball, and cheer. She also loved to go camping. In the summer of 1996, Tawnya told her mother she still wanted to stay in Kansas another year. Since the last school year had gone so well, Lori had no problem with Tawnya living with her father another year. Tawnya was not a troubled teen. She was a very good young lady and was always home when she was told to be home. Tawnya was friends with older kids, and those kids had vehicles. Of course, no teenager tells their parents everything about their lives, so nobody knew a lot about the friendships and what the kids would do. On Saturday, December 7, 1996, a 15-year-old teenager, Tawnya Knight, was getting ready to go hang out with friends. She was finally ungrounded after bringing her grades back up and was able to stay the night with a friend. Tawnya told her father she was going to be staying the night with her friend Rachel. Her dad told her that was fine, but to be home the next day by noon. Tawnya was always very good at being home when she was told to be home. So according to an interview with Sarah, that specific evening, Tawnya and her friends Sarah and Crystal went to Paola, Kansas in Sarah's car. Eventually, they came back to Spring Hills, Kansas, and that is when they changed clothes. This is when Sarah and Crystal wanted to go to Shooters in Olathe, Kansas, and Tawnya decided she did not want to go. So Tawnya asked Sarah if she could drop her off at their friend house, Haney, which is the known hangout for the kids. Sarah and Crystal took Tawnya to Haney's house. She went up and asked if she could stay, and they told her yes. So Tawnya told Sarah and Crystal she was staying at Haney's house while they went to Olathe. Sarah told Tawnya she would come back and get her around midnight if she came back to Spring Hills that night. But Sarah and Crystal did not come back that night, but returned the next day. When Tawnya got dropped off at Haney's house, there were other kids there as well. There was Haney, Elijah, Lee, and Steve. It is believed that Tawnya had a thing for Elijah, who was at Haney's house, and that may have been the reason she wanted to be dropped off in the first place. The following day, December 8, 1996, when Tawnya was not home by noon, the dad started to worry. He waited, and she wasn't home at 2, 4, or even 6, so he knew something was wrong. All this time, he was calling around to friends, asking them if they had seen Tawnya. When nobody had seen her, then he called police. The police took his statement, but assumed she was a runaway and would return home eventually. The girl Rachel, where Tawnya was supposed to stay with, will not talk to anyone about Tawnya. According to Sarah, the police pulled her over and asked her if she had seen Tawnya. She told them the last time she had seen her is when she dropped her off at Haney's house the night before. Frank did not believe that Tawnya was a runaway, so he went to the local media to get Tanya's story out in the news. He thought if the police weren't going to treat her missing as urgent, because they thought she was a runaway, he needed to turn to the media to get his story out there so that it would become an urgent matter. The media went ahead and published the story without contacting police. Finally, on December 12, 1996, the Johnson County Sheriff's Office got involved. Local law enforcement still had Tawnya down as a runaway, but Johnson County Sheriff's Office investigated it as a missing person. They thought Tawnya was missing because she did not take anything with her, such as clothes or money. That same day, her step-uncle told everyone that Tawnya had called after the story was published on the news and said that she saw the news to tell her dad that she was fine and that she would come home after everything cooled off with her stepmom. Police asked him where she had called from, and he stated he would not give that information as he did not want to break her trust. That made the police believe that she was a runaway. Nobody had any reason to think he was lying, so they did not contact the initial ground search that they were going to do for Tawnya. The Johnson County Sheriff's Office continued to follow up with individuals because they were not sure about the uncle. However, when the uncle was questioned more, he finally told police he was not the one who received the call. His boss's daughter received the call but did not want to get involved, so he instead went to police with the information, stating he received the call. The girl has been questioned by detectives and swears that she received a call from someone saying that they were Tawnya and they sounded just like her. After December 12, 1996, there were no more calls supposedly from Tawnya. The Johnson County Sheriff's Department kept following up with everyone. When Haney and his mom were questioned about Tawnya, Haney told them that he did not know why she wanted to stay at his house. It was not a party house, but he let her stay. She supposedly liked a boy that was at his house. Haney and his mom said the last time they saw her was when she left their house around midnight, and they see her walking towards the cemetery. Haney's mom stated that she told her around midnight it was time to go home, and she could give her a ride. But Tawnya told her she didn't need a ride. Another boy at the party, Steve, who claims he was best friends with Tawnya, stated he left the party around 9 o'clock that night. He walked home from Haney's to his house on Lawrence and Franklin. He had to be home because he was on probation and he would get random calls. He stated that he was home the rest of the evening. Steve verified that Elijah was at Haney's house that night. He told detectives that Haney's mom and Haney told him that Tawnya left with Elijah that night. Steve also said that sometime after midnight he got a knock on his window from Elijah, who wanted to take a shower. Elijah had a duffel bag with him, so Steve thought Elijah would stay the night because he usually did, but after his shower he left to go to another friend's house. In an interview with Steve, his mom did verify that Elijah came over to the house that night and came in the front door to take a shower at their house. She also verified Steve's story about being home that night due to receiving random probation calls, and that he stayed home the rest of the evening. Elijah would not go in for questioning and did not show up at any time when he said he would. On Saturday, June 7, 1997, a farmer was tilling his fields. His field happens to be on the south side of the cemetery. The cemetery and field are separated by a fence. When he was tilling his land, he happened to find a human skull. The farmer called the police and they came out to search the area. This is when the body of Tawnya Knight was found. Tawnya Knight's body and all physical evidence were found within a 10-foot radius. There was a hedgerow that was a thick and dense area. The police believe they would not have found the body had the skull not been dug into the area of the land being tilled by the farmer. Along with Tanya's body, the police found jeans, which were turned inside out, a bra with the clasp broken almost like it was torn off, and it was away from the torso. A shirt that stated, "If you don't like my attitude, dial 1-800-EAT-SHIT," which everyone states did not belong to Tawnya. They also found her billfold, paychecks, and her socks were still on her feet. Tawnya did not have a jacket or shoes on when the body was found. Apparently, according to Steve, she was wearing a Dallas Cowboys starter jacket, which she had borrowed from Steve because she loved the Dallas Cowboys, and she was wearing a blue pair of Nike shoes that belonged to Sarah. They were nowhere to be found. The police have not released whether they have DNA, whether Tawnya was sexually assaulted or not, nor have they released her cause of death. These are things the killer would know. So we know that the police spoke with many different people, and there were many different theories out there about who killed Tawnya Knight. These are just theories that other people have, and I am no way discounting what they believe happened that night. The main theory of who killed Tawnya Knight is from her mom and private investigator Jeff McDonald. They believe that Tawnya was killed by 4 individuals: Sarah, Crystal, Steve, and Rachel. They believe that Tawnya was not good friends with any of them, and that she hadn't been hanging out with them for very long. It's believed that it had to do with jealousy and hate because of something that had happened between the teenagers. They believe that all 4 were involved and know what happened and are covering it up for each other. According to Status Pending, a podcast on Tawnya Knight's case, when they interview the county sheriff's detective, who is retired, Steve Atwell, he had 2 suspects from the very beginning. One he called the street smarts, and one he called dumb guy, which I believe is Steve and Elijah. He believes that the person who killed Tawnya was one of the 4 individuals that the mom and PI believe committed the murder. So from what I gather, the mom believed that Sarah and Steve were involved. Sarah and Steve both said that the day she went missing, they went to look for her, but couldn't find her. The mom didn't think that was true because how would they know she was missing? Well, Detective Atwell was able to verify that the family was calling her friends, and Amber, the stepsister, called Steve to see if he had saw Tawnya. He had not, but told her the last time he saw her was at Haney's house the night before, during which time Sarah has been pulled over by cops asking if she had seen Tawnya. She told them she had not seen Tawnya since the night before when she dropped her off at Haney's house, before her and Crystal headed to Olathe. She was supposed to pick her up at midnight if she came home, but they ended up staying in Olathe all night. Sarah and Steve have both cooperated with police throughout the years, always coming in for interviews and polygraph tests. Now, on the Cold Case Chronicles podcast on Tawnya Knight, there is an interview with Sarah by the police prior to a polygraph. Sarah stated that she would hang around with Tawnya and Steve most of the time. That night, Sarah, Crystal, and Tawnya went to Paola in Sarah's car, then returned to Spring Hills. They changed clothes, and Sarah and Crystal wanted to go to Shooters in Olathe. Tawnya did not want to go, so she asked them to take her to Haney's house. So they took her over to Haney's house, where Tawnya asked if she could stay, and Haney said she could, so the girls left her there. Sarah did tell her before she left that if she came back, she would pick her up around midnight. However, Sarah and Crystal ended up staying in Olathe that night. The next day, when Sarah returned to Spring Hills, is when she was pulled over by police and asked if she knew where Tawnya was, and that's when she told the cops the information. According to Haney, he let Tawnya come over to his house that night, so we know that she was there. He did not understand why she came to his house because they were not close friends, but he thinks it's because there was a boy there she liked, Elijah. So Haney was able to verify that Elijah was at his house that night. According to Haney's mom, she stated that she told Tawnya it was time to go home around midnight and told her she would give her a ride. Tawnya, however, told her she didn't need a ride and left the house headed towards a cemetery. So we know that she already had told her dad she was staying at Rachel's, so she had the whole night to go anywhere. I have listened to a tape recording of the interview Lori did with Steve. Steve's mother is also in the room. Steve states he only knows what he knows, but is willing to go over everything from that night. He stated that hanging out at Haney's house was a thing that they all did. Steve only lives a few blocks from Haney and went home early that night because he receives random probation calls because he was on probation at the time. After Steve got home that night and was in his room sometime around midnight, he got a knock on his window from Elijah. Elijah has his duffel bag and wants to come in and take a shower. Steve told him that was fine. Steve's mom verified that Elijah did come in that night to take a shower. Steve thought he would spend the night like he usually does, but he ended up going to another friend's house after the shower. Elijah and Steve were good friends. Elijah thought he was a tough guy and had taken an interest in Tawnya. However, Steve did not want that for Tawnya because she was better than Elijah. He would always protect Tawnya, and his mother verified that he always looked out for her. Steve did say that Tawnya used to borrow all kinds of Dallas Cowboys clothes from him because she really loved the Dallas Cowboys. That he knows for a fact that Tawnya had his Dallas Cowboys starter jacket. Lori asked him if he had ever seen the shirt Tawnya was wearing that said, "If you don't like my attitude, dial 1-800-EAT-SHIT." He stated that shirt was not his and he had never seen it. Steve told Lori that he did go out looking for Tawnya that night, after he found out she went missing. He was asked why he did not go to the funeral, and he stated that he didn't go because the whole town had turned on him and was accusing him of killing Tawnya. He just does not understand why she was headed towards a cemetery that evening. Lori asked him why he was giving different information, and Steve said that he thought he was helping by remembering different information. He goes over the night so much and believes someone they know killed her. He even offered to wear a wire but never did, and he would still wear a wire if he was asked. He blames himself for not being there that night. However, Steve has since passed away from cirrhosis of the liver. The last thing I want to discuss is a Facebook conversation between Sarah and Steve after Sarah had talked to the police. In this conversation, Sarah tells Steve she got a call from a detective, asking if her or anyone she knows would be interested in doing a TV ad, asking for tips on Tanya's case. She claims she does not know what the fuck happened, if Steve was involved or not, or knows anything or not, but she feels it is her duty as a friend to try to help. Steve responds stating that he doesn't understand why anyone would think for 2 seconds that he would do anything with Tawnya. He hopes that they reopen the case. He claims that everyone knew where he was that night because he had a 9 p.m. curfew for probation. He proceeds to ask about all the other stuff that occurred during that time, like why her uncle called into the police and told them that she would be home because of her stepmom. What about Lee making sexual comments to her right before she left Haney's? How about all these people at Haney's when she left? Steve claims to have had 8 people at his house that night saying he was home. He also tells Sarah that she knew him better than a lot of other people, and that her and Steve protected the girl. If someone made a comment about her, they were always there. The whole situation is sad. Steve goes on to say that he has heard it all, even that Sarah had something to do with it, but he does not believe that. All it is finger pointing while their friend has been murdered by some piece of shit still walking around. He also lets Sarah know that Elijah has come to him on Facebook. Maybe he would be interested in help. This has affected him as well. Then Sarah responds to Steve saying she wasn't implying that he had anything to do with it. She just cannot trust anyone and it sucks. Sarah states that her and Steve were best friends. She never thought he had anything to do with the murder that night. But every time she talks to detectives, they always ask about Steve. She wishes she knew what happened. All she knows is that next day, Haney told her Elijah walked her home. And that stuck with her. Sarah goes on to say that from obvious knowledge, Elijah was a little psycho at times, which also scared her, so she cut all contact with him. Honestly, she always thought he was involved in it one way or another. Sarah went on to say that Lee carried a knife all the time, which puts him at the scene for me, but also that Debbie Haney's mom covered for him, not allowing the cops to talk to him right away. Sarah just wishes she could get together with everyone and talk about what has been heard through the grapevine and solve this shit. Sarah says that she cries every time she goes through Spring Hill. She apologizes for Steve thinking she accused him, but she just assumed that since he was better friends with those guys than her, she thought that maybe he was keeping something from her because they quit hanging out. There is a lot more information on the conversation, but just more of them going back and forth on who did it. Ultimately, Steve and Sarah believe that Elisha and maybe Lee had something to do with her death that night, and Haney is covering for them. Steve doesn't understand why Elisha is all of a sudden getting on Facebook and sending friend requests. Sarah knows Elijah did not speak to the cops and originally agreed to meet with the cops, but Elijah never showed up. She claims that when the cops called him, he told them, "You can't make me come and you have nothing on me." Sarah also mentions that Tawnya was raped, stabbed, and strangled. I'm not sure how she got this information unless during one of her interviews or polygraphs they asked her about it. So I am just speculating on how she found that information out unless she was there to witness it all happen. The last thing I want to mention is that the Dallas Cowboy starter jacket was found by detectives. It was in the possession of Elijah's ex-girlfriend's little sister, but the shoes were never found. After everything I have listened to, read, and discussed here today, I wanted to give my theory on what I believed happened to Tawnya Knight. I do think that Sarah and Crystal went to Olathe that night and did not come back until the next day, and that is when Tawnya went to Haney's house. I believe that she mainly went to Haney's house because the boy she liked, Elijah, was at his house. I think she hung out with him until around midnight when Haney's mom said she needed to go home and offered her a ride. That is when Tawnya told her she did not need a ride because we know she was supposed to be staying at someone's house that night, so she was not going home. I believe that Elijah either left with her that night, as Steve suggests, or he left shortly after her, meeting up with her because he was going to stay the night at another friend's that night, and that is why he had the duffel bag. I believe they went to the back of the cemetery to be out of the view from everyone. This is where I think they were kissing and making out a little. I think the boy wanted more and Tawnya did not, so at this time he began to force his way on her. I think that is when he removed her jeans, this is why they were inside out, and he ripped off her bra, and that is why the clasp was broken. After the incident was done, I believe Tawnya was all upset and threatening to tell on him and to report him to the cops, and he knew he would be in big trouble. He may or may not had a knife on him and stabbed her, but I believe that he did strangle her to get her to be quiet. That way she would not be able to tell anyone what he had done. He then proceeds to drag the body and all her stuff to Hedge Row and puts her in the brush where nobody can see her. At this time he takes the 2 most expensive items she was wearing, the Dallas Cowboy starter jacket and the blue Nike shoes. He then proceeds to go over to Steve's house to take a shower and to get rid of any evidence on him. All this time he has never spoken to police, but has been mentioned as being someone around that night in different scenarios. He lived in a different town and just went back home and pretended like nothing ever happened, while Tanya's friends took the rap for everything he had done. Why not? Nobody has ever looked at him or suspected him of a crime, and he has not been pursued. he pretty much gets away with everything and doesn't have to worry. There is a $10,000 reward for information leading to a conviction. You can remain anonymous and possibly close a case that's been waiting for decades. If you believe you have information about the night Tawnya was murdered, please contact the Johnson County Sheriff's Department on their tip line at 816-474-TIPS. If you have any information you want to discuss or any cold case murders you would like to hear, please email me at untoldcoldcases@gmail.com. Thank you for listening.